want to talk with Brooks Fischer from Newman Architects here on the morning show with Ray and Brian. Good morning, Brooks.
Hey, morning, Brooks.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you? So you have a lot of different projects. You guys don't just do schools, but you do build schools. I think you just built a couple of years ago a nursing school in Connecticut. And I'm just curious first, what's wanting in our country when it comes to the physical infrastructure of our schools?
Well, clearly, coming out of the COVID pandemic, there is lots of mechanical upgrades and system upgrades that need to happen in order to ensure safe environments for the students. But also, really, there's the changing in teaching and what's happening going forward with teaching ideas. A lot of the schools that were built back in the 50s and 60s, as you said, are just not equipped to teach in the way that teaching is happening nowadays and how teaching will happen into the future.
And there were like 30 and 40 kids in a class. I mean, I remember that when I was in there. So it does happen. So you need more room. You need more classrooms, I would guess.
That's absolutely right. For one, there was, kids were jammed into classrooms, but also as time has gone on, there's been more and more programs that have been created, ELL, special ed programs. And so all those programs, they just add to square footage needs. And we're really looking at ways to find square footage to be leveraged through the buildings that are there today, because a lot of the building stock is still older, so 50s and 60s stock that students are still in.
So, I mean, in terms of projects, like a lot of infrastructure, they've been put off for decades. Are you seeing an uptick in interest in doing something more dramatic with rebuilding our schools? I mean, are you getting more people come to you and say, we need this?
Yes. I mean, I think, the pandemic is likely something that had just heightened awareness on some of the lack of performance of some of the schools.
Right.
Also, because of the pandemic, we've seen that people are able to do teaching in many, many different ways. I think we could have all imagined that a year ago you'd never think that a student could learn through a Zoom call, but we're seeing that is possible. And so that, in a way, the pandemic has allowed teachers and districts to think about teaching in all different ways. And so now they're looking at their facilities and saying, how can we turn these facilities into schools of the future that allow for different types of teaching? So it's really kind of expanded our thought process on how we can educate children.
Hey, Brooks, when, one of the things we've heard about is air handling. And, of course, Brian and I were talking, back to the old days. You could open the windows in classrooms. I don't think you can do that anymore for a number of reasons, energy efficiency, so on and so forth. But the fact is air handling has become a deal, HVAC. And so are you using things like ultraviolet scrubbers and, filters like to 0.25 or something like that?
Yes, absolutely. So some of the work we're doing down in Norwalk right now is we're going through all of their schools and we're reviewing all the mechanical systems. Sometimes it's as simple as just changing out filters and making sure that the filters are up to date. But other times the systems just aren't optimized. They're not operating properly.
Right.
And ventilation and indoor air quality is one of the most important factors for students. And studies have shown time and time again that when students aren't comfortable, it's very difficult to learn. So that is one of the major focuses that we're seeing in the industry, is trying to create indoor air quality and indoor air environments that are proper for teaching.
You're talking a lot about sort of fixing existing building as opposed to rebuilding.
Yes.
Do you think from a cost benefit standpoint that's the right call with a lot of these schools?
Well, so of course, when we get involved with any clients, that's always an analysis that we do early on. So some buildings are beneficial to be renovated, and they can be. Others are just they're just so difficult to renovate based on how they were built and organized. So it really is a case by case basis, and at times it is just a lot more cost effective to knock down and build new.
Wow. And I just wanted to go back, some of the needs there. We've talked quite a bit about the pandemic and, of course, air handling and all that. But, I'm thinking about back to Sandy Hook. There were also needs when it came to school security. Have you been dealing with that?
Yes, for sure. So some of the work that we're doing now and have been ever since Sandy Hook is really school security. And it's not just security in terms of the vestibule and the outdoor layers of security, but it's also the security of students individually and spaces throughout the school that allow for students to have a sense of safety. I mean, we hear about bullying in schools and things like that all the time. Sure. The way that facilities are organized, designed, and set up allow for students' sense of safety throughout the day.
We're talking with Brooks Fischer here on the morning show from Newman Architects. We were talking, Ray and I, about how really schools should be considered infrastructure in our country. If there were to be some grand bargain in D.C. to have a large national infrastructure deal, would school facilities be included in that?
From my perspective, I would think that they should. They are infrastructure. We have education for every student in the country, and so that is really a part of the money that flows through from tax dollars. And so the way that it does work is there is a lot of money coming through for schools, but it's sometimes hard to make that money go the distance that it needs to make these schools operate the way that they should.
One other thing, and if you remember, when I was in school, and that was quite a while ago, we were using stone tablets, so don't go too far on this. But, the thing was, you had the lunchroom, you had the gym, you had all these places where, we could gather and play dodgeball and stuff like that. Is that still going to be part of the design, do you think?
Yes, for sure. So something else I should mention, we just recently this year made a strategic alliance with the DLR Group, who is a nationally known architecture firm. And they're doing school design all over the country and internationally. And, they're really seeing where a lot of the schools of the future are. And so your question about those kinds of spaces, of course, those are still critically important, because we also know schools are a community resource. These are the most expensive buildings that any city builds, and they leverage them for community resources. So these types of spaces are not only important for the school day, but they're also important for the community to use for community events, for recreational sports, for all those types of things. So
voting, for that matter.
Absolutely.
You talked about the expense of it, and there's a huge range, and so in some ways it's an unfair question. But if a lovely town in Connecticut came to you and said, "We need a new high school," and it's a high school of 1,500 kids, like what does that kind of school cost?
Give us a bid right now.
In terms of a range, is that a $150 million project? Is it a $50 million project?
Could be.
So so the state has standards. So the state would say that if a school is to be built, it should be about this many square foot per student. And then and then of course the kind of construction costs for these types of buildings have ranges as well. We're seeing construction costs in the range of about $300 a square foot for school buildings. There's also, there's standards for energy efficiency, which are important because longevity costs of these schools. Some of the schools that we renovate now, the existing ones, are mostly being renovated because the energy costs are so high that the life cycle cost of a building can really drain. So, your question of range. Yeah, you're for 1,500 students, you're up near 100 million.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much, Brooks, for being on with us. That was great.
Well, thank